printed 5,000 copies of that book. Bass Pro sold the most of them. They were gone in 18 months.
She said, "What you cooking?" And she couldn't believe it. It was, you couldn't make a better camp story than that one.
I've met a lot of characters in my lifetime, and Ron is in that top 5 group.
They don't realize that, there's a lot of folks that if they can't do what we're doing out here this weekend, they can't live for the winter.
Here sat an old gentleman with an old ragged felt hat on, and he's got this old raccoon head gnawing on it. Now, if that don't put a picture in your mind, I don't know what does.
The old-timers may seem quiet, but they are dying to share. And, man, they got a lot to share.
Hi, I'm Bill Cooper.
And I'm Paddle Don, and you're listening to The Wild Initiative.
Put down your latte and pull on your boots.
I would rest at peace for eternity if my legacy was that I made a positive influence on the non-hunting public about what hunters are and what hunting is.
I finally got my buck on our last real day of hunting.
So a pro-hunting organization is voting against hunting. And that says anti-hunting to me.
There was a year straight where I was averaging up to 200 death threats a day.
I hugged it like I just wanted to hug a bear.
It's proven that the average steak in a grocery store touches 50 to 100 hands and machines. And we're putting that into our body.
Hey y'all, Cable Smith, host of the Lone Star Outdoors Show here.
This is Adam Weatherby.
I'm Corey Jacobson with Elk 101.
This is Christy Titus.
Hey folks, this is John Barrett.
You're listening to The Wild Initiative.
Hey y'all, welcome to episode 126 of The Wild Initiative. Before we get started, as always, a huge thank you to Sawyer Products for their continued support of the podcast. Y'all, Sawyer offers the absolute best when it comes to water filtration, first aid, sunscreen, and insect repellent. It's really that stuff that just keeps you in the outdoors for longer. They've been doing it for over 30 years, and they are a household name for a reason. Make sure y'all check out their entire product lineup, pick up some gear at Sawyer.com. So as many of y'all that follow me on Instagram already know, I just recently got back from deer camp in the Missouri Ozarks. Was invited out by Brandon Butler. Y'all heard from him a few episodes ago on the podcast. I met him out at the POMA conference in Wichita this year, and we got a chance to connect, and I feel really honored that he invited me out for his yearly deer camp at his Driftwood Acres lodge. Y'all, we had a great time. Brandon has just a beautiful setup out there, bordering public land, and we got a chance to go sit for some whitetail. Unfortunately, I was not able to fill a tag. I had a chance on several does, but I decided to hold out for a buck. Unfortunately, that did not work out for me. But one of the guys at deer camp, Shags, he was able to harvest just a beautiful buck, and he was originally going to donate the meat. So I offered to cape out the deer for him and quarter it out if he would allow me to take the meat home. So fortunately, while I didn't get to come home with my own deer, I got to come home with a freezer full of meat. But y'all, while we were at deer camp, I really got a chance to sit down with a lot of these guys, hear stories. You know, some of these guys really are just steeped in the outdoors is the best way to describe it. Some of them have just history beyond what I could ever hope to have for myself. And with that comes some really amazing stories. So one of the nights I sat down with two of the guys, Paddle Don Cranfill and Bill the Gravel Bar Gourmet Cooper. And we sidled up to the fire out front, threw on some microphones, and I just really got a cool chance to listen to these guys' history and their stories about being in the outdoors. Y'all, this is one of my absolute favorite episodes to date. I really just enjoyed hearing from these guys, and we had a great time just sitting by the fire and chatting. So I know for a fact you will really enjoy this episode. So without further ado, episode 126 with Paddle Don Cranfill and Bill the Gravel Bar Gourmet Cooper.
All right, y'all, welcome to another episode of The Wild Initiative. We are out here in, I don't know, what part of... Is this the Ozarks?
This is the Missouri Ozarks.
We are in the Missouri Ozarks, not the Lake of the Ozarks, if you've watched too much Netflix, but out here at deer camp, and we officially got kicked out of the cabin because Brandon and Shags are recording a podcast with Orthman.
And we're sitting by a campfire, which is much
we got the better deal.
We definitely got the better deal, so we decided, screw them, we're going to record a better podcast. Have a couple of drinks. But But I am here with Mr. Paddle Don Cranfill and Billy Cooper. Thanks for sitting down, guys.
Hey, never miss a campfire.
Bill Cooper, the Gravel Bar Gourmet.
Gravel Bar Gourmet. All right, so what's that name mean?
Well, for a decade, I wrote a column for the Outdoor Guide magazine out of St. Louis called the Gravel Bar Gourmet, and all it was about was cooking on gravel bars. You know, it's a big deal here in the Ozarks. We have a lot of free-flowing, undammed, clean, cold water streams, and they have gravel bars on them. And people like to camp there or stop and picnic, swim, fish. And I like to cook on them because I camp on them sometimes days at a time. You got to eat, man. And everybody knows that food is always better outdoors. And actually an old fella has started that column many years ago. Hank Rifus was his name, and he was known, Don, as one of the best fly fishermen for smallmouth in the Ozarks. He could literally lay a line across any of these rivers. But he was an old hippie from way back, man, and he used to roar up and down these gravel roads, and he got in trouble more than once for that. And some of his columns he wrote, he'd tell wild tales about some of the things he's done, and some of the real good parents, would get a little upset because their kids was reading that material. But anyway, I inherited that column, and I carried it for a decade, and I think now they're looking for somebody else to do it.
So the Gravel Bar Gourmet, so is it actually cooking on the rocks, or is it just how to cook when you're camping out there?
How to cook when you're out outdoors. I did cook over open fires quite a bit. In fact, it was really interesting that you cooked hobo meals yesterday. I did a lot of that on the gravel bars, the easiest thing in the world to do. But got a little fancy sometimes, and it was always interesting. I had a lot of recipes that I could adapt to the gravel bar situation because in 1999 I did an outdoor celebrities cookbook with all the major names throughout the United States, and I got that idea actually from working through Bass Pro. I would go down when Springfield, Missouri was the only store and record programs with all the big names, Bill Jordan, Realtree, Ronica, Strickland. You may not know some of those names. I'm so old, and those guys are getting old too. But Bass Pro would have a fall hunting classic and a spring fishing classic, and I would literally go down. Bass Pro would put me up in a motel, feed me, give an office to work out of, and line me up with these big name celebrity types, and I'd knock out 25 to 30-minute radio programs in one weekend. I'd go home, dub all those up, send them out to about 10 radio stations. I didn't have to work again for 6 months. That was pretty cool. But a lot of those guys talked recipes, and I wound up doing a celebrities cookbook, which did really well for me. And I still go back to it occasionally, pull out a recipe, maybe adapt it a little bit, and make it so it fits into the Gravel Bar Gourmet.
Just to attest to his gravel bar cooking abilities, over last summer, a bunch of us took a trip down the upper stretches of the Current River in the Current River Wilderness area. First of all, I got to tell you that it was an absolutely incredible experience. That section of river is actually more like it fishes like a creek, and I'm a fishing guy, and that's how I look at it. And it was back and forth winding creek, absolutely beautiful. We got a campsite on a gravel bar with a view of the Milky Way that I didn't know you could see in the lower 48. It was awe-inspiring.
Yeah, one of the guys got an incredible shot of that. All the group around a big campfire in the Milky Way and the bright.
Yeah,
just as bright
it was
as
absolutely beautiful. Well, we hit trout and smallmouth for several days, one after another, but in between, Bill dazzled us with his gravel bar cooking abilities, and I gotta say, we ate well that weekend.
Yeah, they discovered, though, the secret ingredient to every recipe I do on the gravel bars. I didn't intend for that to get out, but the secret ingredient for every dish is a pinch of sand.
Just a pinch of sand.
Because you're going to get sand in your food anyway.
I was going to say, is that by choice, or did it just end up happening?
Either or. Or both.
So, is there still a spot to find the cookbook, the celebrity cookbook?
Yeah, you have to hunt for it because I had the idea that I was going to do another volume every 5 years.
Okay.
But I printed 5,000 copies of that book, and Bass Pro sold the most of them. They were gone in 18 months. And so I went to do a reprint, and did I ever get shocked in my life? Went to reprint that book, and printing cost had tripled in 18 months.
Yeesh.
So there was no money to be made, so I didn't do a second edition, that one, and went through a divorce, and so kind of dropped that project. But I made good money off the first one, but was quite an adventure. The first time I published a book, learned a lot of things. It would have been very easy to do the next one, but just never got to it. But yeah, you can find them on like Amazon. In fact, I found a copy there here about 6 months ago. They wanted $242 for it.
I tell you what,
$21.95 at Bass Pro.
You should actually look into releasing it as like an ebook on Amazon, because there's almost no cost with that. And
yeah, I've had a number of people suggest that, but it's kind of dated.
Somebody's shooting after dark.
Shooting,
not sure if y'all can hear that.
That's a late night deer.
Yeah, that's a Ozark style deer hunting.
Ozark deer.
It's probably them same boys that are running the dogs.
Oh yeah.
You'll have that around
Another interesting story. But yeah, the cookbook was a big adventure, but kind of let it go by the wayside, and the cost got in the way. And I just enjoyed so many people. And all my writer buddies told me it never worked. So you'll never get those big shot outdoorsmen to send you recipes. But what I didn't tell my writer buddies was that the way I coaxed people into participating was I offered them a page in the back of the cookbook to kind of tell their story and promote their business. And I sold a lot of them at outdoor shows, getting somebody's booth and show it to people, flip to those pages, show them, hey, Will Primo's here. He's right over there in that booth. Just walk up there and ask him. He'll autograph that for you.
Nice.
So those guys really helped me out.
Yeah.
Who were some of the people that you did recipes with?
Oh, my gosh. Of course, Bill Jordan's one of the big ones. You know, the Drury Boys I work for now, the Deer Cast, they were in it. Mark was had 4 beautiful pictures on the cover and 4 on the back. Larry Weissoon, who, does the Safari Club International, he wrote a recommendation for the book.
Very good.
Such a gentleman. Walter Parrott, big-time turkey hunter. Of course, Ray I here from Missouri, Brad Harris, Ted Nugent sent recipes.
Ted Nugent sent some, man.
Yeah,
All right,
he
Uncle
did.
Ted.
He did. And I'll just quiz you guys. You're both good outdoorsmen. What would you say would be the most common animal that people sent recipes for?
Well, I mean, the immediate reaction would be venison or deer.
I gotta say squirrel gravy.
But I was gonna say just because he's asking the question.
Squirrel gravy and dumplings is the go-to.
You both get zapped. Now, beaver.
Beaver.
Everybody thought they had the corner on the market for beaver recipes.
Everyone's like, oh, nobody else is going to send him beaver recipes. I'm going to send him a beaver recipe.
Yeah, it was hilarious. But Brenda Valentine participated. She's the, what they call the First Lady of the Outdoors, spokesperson for the National Wild Turkey Federation. Gosh, some names that I've lost over the time. Bob Jensen, I think, from Michigan, I believe, but got people from all over. And what was so interesting, I sent out 200 letters of invitation for people to participate in the book, and I had 80 responses within 2 weeks, and that was enough to do a book. But I got one of the Department of Conservation artists to illustrate the book, pen and ink stuff. Incredible artist. And I threw in just a smidgen of stories from people like Joel Vance. He's one of 3 people who won all 3 major writing awards from the Outdoor Writers Association of America. Mark Van Patten, who we was just talking about a few minutes ago, dear friend of mine, a great storyteller, great writer, great. Anything he does is great. But Mark did a story about fishing with St. Nick. And I just ran that story in a magazine. He's out on Current River, I'm sure it was, or No, because he talked about Phelps County. It must have been Mill Creek or somewhere. But anyway, he ran into Santa Claus out on a trout stream, And it's Santa Claus, you know how he does. He shows up quickly and he disappears quickly. But the last thing he said with Mark was, make a cast right over there. And he catches this 9-pound rainbow with a ribbon on its tail.
Fully true story, right?
Fully true.
100%.
Yeah. Hey, if it comes from the Ozarks, it's true, man.
It's true.
Oh, man. I'll tell you what, it's been an adventure hunt out here so far. We've been out, this is day number 2?
Day number 2, 4 sessions. We've been going from pre-sun up till 10:30 or 11, and then getting back out after lunch. That's one of the neat things about deer camp here is we try and outdo each other with our lunch and dinner recipes. And
yeah, we're all gaining weight.
Yeah, and I gotta hand it to you, Sam. I'm always a sucker for something sentimental, and your lunch yesterday was the hobo pies. Just throw your ingredients in the foil and toss it on the fire, and that's something that my family is really, it's one of the things I'm nostalgic about because, I couldn't count how many times I've had that over a fire growing up. But it was neat to do it here at deer camp this year.
It really was. It brought back some memories for me as well because I've dealt with a lot of youth organizations over the years, and I can't tell you how many hundreds, if not thousands, of those things I've made. But boy, you were elaborate. You had all kinds of goodies to go in.
So we've been talking. Fill us in. Tell us.
Yeah, tell us.
Everybody has a lunch and a dinner they got to do, and Sam drew yesterday's lunch, so I'll let him fill you in on what we're doing here.
Well, yeah, I didn't have a lot of outdoor experiences growing up. I mean, I had my fair share, but, I grew up in Orange County, and so we were, for us it was the beach. That was what we'd do. But every year, since I was 3 probably, we go to this spot out in Sequoia National Forest, kind of Kings Canyon National Forest area, and we'd rent a cabin, and we'd stay there. Started out as a week, then we moved it up to 2 weeks. But I mean, pretty much every year since I was a kid, and we'd camp, and it was fully rigged up cabin. It wasn't exactly tent camping or anything, but that was always one of our meals. So I grew up. That's about as nostalgic for me as it gets having those. And,
there you go.
I was talking with Shags, and I was just drawing a blank because I'm flying in. I was gonna have to pick up everything right before coming in, and I was just I kind of wanted to do something elaborate, but I'm like I think I should just keep it simple and and something. And the nice thing about it is everybody makes what they want.
Everybody gets what they want. It's delicious.
Nobody's got anything to complain about, and the best part is there's almost zero prep and there's almost zero cleanup.
That's exactly right, man. and hey, it's such a wholesome meal too. I mean, you got that ground beef in there and all the veggies, and you even had some kind of beans. What was it? Is that?
Oh, baked beans. Yeah, pork and beans.
There,
that's always that's always my favorite part. I'm such a sucker for baked beans. I would.
I tell you what,
I'd fight someone over some baked beans, but
it was darn good.
Well, you mentioned Shags, so we are here. We're at what we call Driftwood Acres. And I don't mean to commandeer you.
No, go ahead.
Throw a little bit of who Shags is in here.
Yeah.
The infamous Shags, the nearly 7-foot Shaggy.
yeah.
Who, by the way, dropped an awesome buck this evening.
Yeah, a beautiful buck.
Yeah,
I'm hoping that broke the seal for all of us. I'll tell you what.
Oh, me too, boy. We've had a tough time.
We haven't even been really. I mean, there's been a couple of sightings, but I mean, compared to what it should be, we have not been seeing much.
I've seen all kinds of deer. I just haven't seen any shooters. I've had does all around me.
But there's different definitions of shooters,
Well, yeah, I mean, we're shooting. Somebody's shooting for meat. Somebody's shooting for bragging rights.
Yeah.
But even so, I mean, everything's been fleeting glimpses for me. I've had an incredible experience. So I'm way out on a finger ridge that's almost a mile walk out, and I've had, right at sunrise the first morning, had 4 turkeys come down off a tree, and strut right past me, and that was glorious. And then I had 3 does come in. They were all right now. Everything in these woods is hot and bothered. The scrapes are hot, and the does are really, really, really looking at them. And these does are up here working some scrapes on a ridge that I'm at, and I thought they'd have had a buck with them, and either I am hunting from the ground. Didn't have time to get a stand out this year, and I don't know if it's scent or what, but the does hung around, but I never saw the buck. And then day 2 had I got great video of 4 raccoons that are just almost in my blind with me. This one is almost close enough to pet. But
it's always so much fun to see that kind of stuff, isn't it?
Well, it is. But you know what? The heartening thing about all this is, the does knew something was there. They didn't blow, but they kind of knew something was there, but they stayed around. The turkeys just moseyed through, and the coons literally got cozy with me. So that tells me I'm doing something right out there.
Absolutely.
I'm not scaring them off. So
yeah, that's for sure.
And then tonight, right at dark, I had my buck come in, and just because of a freak condition, winds turned 90 degrees. It was dead still, and just a little gust came out 90 degrees that blew my scent right up the trail, exactly into his nose, and he spent the next 25 minutes up there blowing at me, just stomping the ground and blowing and throwing a fit. Knew I was there, but didn't know where I was. And I knew my night was done then, but tomorrow's a new day.
It is. Mm-hmm. It is. Well, I started out, of course, I'm meat hunting. I mean, I've got any deer tag, and then I bought an extra doe tag. I've got a wild game dinner coming up in late January. Our church organization does it for men and boys. We'll have 300 men and boys show up. Man, we'll give away all kinds of stuff. It's a big feed, and I'll bring some of the weirdest stuff you ever heard of, man. There'll be groundhog. There's always talk of skunk being there, And
that's one of the neat fundraisers that I've seen come up lately, among outdoor folks. It's these wild game. I mean, you eat all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But it's all for a good cause.
Yeah.
And it all tastes delicious.
Yeah. Well, I get the biggest kick out of them because this one's held at Steelville. It's way out in the hills, and literally, I mean, it's like stepping back 100 years when you go to Steelville, and those people know how to hunt and fish, but I usually video a little of it, take some photographs, but I always go check out the pots and what's in everything before everybody starts eating. And a couple of years ago, one, and there's a raccoon head. Yeah, it's been barbecued.
That's glorious.
I thought,
the whole head's been barbecued?
Yeah. Now, this is going to trip some people out, so I kept an eye on this raccoon head, and a little bit I go out and I'm walking up and down the table aisles there to film people, and here sat an old gentleman with an old ragged felt hat on, plaid shirt, overalls, and he's got this whole raccoon head gnawing on it. If that don't put a picture in your mind, I don't know what does.
Oh, that's glorious.
So, side story, slightly related to that. Back in the day, I actually used to do historical reenacting for a living, buckskinner, mountain man stuff.
Yeah.
And we were at a big national reenactment, Barren River Lake, Kentucky, back long time ago. But when they come through that state park back in there, it's this beautiful hillside on this cove overlooking the lake, and there was over 1,000 lodges set up in there.
Wow.
I mean, teepees and wall tents as far as you could see. Apparently, when they had come through with these bush hogs ahead of time, clearing these paths out through this hillside so we could set this up, there was an innocent life that was claimed in the form of a possum. But we got into camp, and I
thought this was going to be a really for a split second. I thought this story was going to get real depressing.
Yeah.
I was like, damn.
We got into camp and got 3 18-foot lodges set up. Back at the time, we had a store, and we outfitted folks that did historical reenacting. So we had an 18 by 20 marquee tent, had it all set up, and as we're making fire, off to the side, we found this possum, and Yeah, it was middle of summer. We didn't want, we got chucked off to the side. But one of the things that when you're doing these reenactments, everybody come in the craziest. We just call them the Flatlanders come in. And is that a real fire? Is that a real teepee?
Is that a real fire?
Yeah. We got those questions.
Oh, yeah.
So this old fellow that's passed away long ago, it was kind of a mentor to me, a guy named Keeper. Everybody in that business goes by their camp names, but Keeper was a legend. And that last day, we had a big old kettle that we'd had stew on, and he threw some water in there and was cooking it down, I'm not cooking it down, but was boiling it to clean that pot out. And he got the wise idea to pull a prank and throw that possum up in there. And that thing had a lid on it, and it was the last day that the tourists were allowed in there. And this lady come in, and she was one of those, is that a real fire crowd? But she said, what you cooking? And just, if you know anything about reenactors, you can bet that they're going to quote Jeremiah Johnson like it's the Bible. Yeah. And he reaches out and grabs the lid on that pot and raises it up and says, grown particular. And just as he raises that pot, this possum rolls up. It was laying with its back up and just rolled up and showed its face. And this lady ran off into she couldn't believe it. It was, you couldn't make a better camp story than that one.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
He's long since departed this world, but
right on cue.
That man was the master of good times.
Oh, gosh. It's funny the little goofy stories like that stick with you.
Yeah, but that's one of the great things I love. And it happens all over the country. It's just not the Ozarks, but the history of the Ozarks is so interesting, so full of stories. And there was even Vance Randolph. Oh, I must have been back in the 1800s, maybe, I think, early 1900s. He wrote a book that's full of wild tales called Pissing in the Snow. He also wrote one called Bawdy Tales of the Ozarks, just nasty stories, and most of them were told by women.
Oh, man.
It is an interesting way of life out here in these hills.
It is, and in my lifetime, of course, I'm not originally from the hills. I was a swamp rat from down southeast Missouri, but fell in love with the hills. But there was a gentleman by the name of Mitch Jane who just passed away 4, 5, 6 years ago. He lived down here at Eminence. Best storyteller I ever run into in my life, man. And he wrote several books. Fiddler's Ghost was one of them, but he told all the old mountain stories, and so many of them were about sitting around campfires with all the old timers, and they had their hounds loose. They were fox hunters, and they'd go out and turn the hounds loose and build a fire and just sit there, and they didn't chase the fox, they just listened to the hounds, But all the stories he told, he was a school teacher, school at Northeast Missouri State, I guess. In one of his books, he made the statement that people get married for the strangest reasons, and he said, first time I married a gal because of the way she talked. She was from Eminence, and she spoke Shakespearean English, which was pretty common up until the 1950s. There's Irish descent folks. Well, he came down here in Shannon County and taught at a one-room school, and one of the charges that the school board gave him was to break those children from using Shakespearean English. They thought they'd be more successful in life speaking regular English, He said, but you do have to understand the most educated person on my board did not quite finish the third grade. But, he could tell some of the grandest stories. And it was so funny, though, because he looked so out of place in the Ozarks because he was a thin, elegant-looking man, particularly in his older years, had white hair. He combed back, man, always wear a white shirt and white pants, and he had a big necklace of bear claws that he wore all the time. But he was in a band, too, called the Dillards. They actually played on the Andy Griffith Show for a couple seasons.
Huh.
And he did a radio show out of Salem, Missouri here for like 20 years, and it was poking fun at the hillbillies, you know, and he wrote all the material fresh every week. There were 5 characters in the stories, and he was all 5 characters.
Wow.
Just an incredible talent.
Well, I'm going to take over for a minute again here. You know, we're sitting out here at Driftwood Acres, and Sam, I'm going to throw this on you this is a new twist, but I want to get Bill to talk about something.
That'll cost you a quarter.
Yeah, I got a quarter. Ron Kruger.
Oh my goodness.
We were talking about him earlier today. Now, I'm going to put a little preface out here. Ron was kept showing, you know, social media these days. All these outdoor folks are on social media, and Ron kept showing up, and this guy had some incredible pictures that he kept posting, and he just did not look the part at all. But for some reason, Facebook thought we should be friends, and I finally said okay and hit a friend request. And he accepted. And Brandon Butler, who is the fellow who's hosting this weekend out here, was a common friend. And then since I met you, and you were a common friend, but Ron and I shared a few just random exchanges online, and then he has since passed away. But what does he mean to these local hills and especially these rivers?
Oh, my goodness. He's the epitome of this wild country. And Kruger's such an interesting character. You know, we all, particularly in the outdoors, and I'm 70 years old, so I've met a lot of characters in my lifetime. And Ron is in that top 5 group. Incredible gentleman and an incredible story. Without a doubt, my favorite outdoor rider of all time, and a tremendous photographer as well. But he was such a strange personality. I often wondered if he wasn't. He was so moody in and out, you know. But he edited the Hunting and Fishing Journal out of St. Louis, still my favorite all-time magazine. It was like the Playboy of outdoor magazines at the time. I mean, it was out there, beautiful photography, top writers, and grand stories. And I guess some millionaire or billionaire had started the magazine. It was just a tax write-off. When it lost a couple million, they shut it down. So Ron just picks up and moves to southwest Missouri out in the National Forest, found a shack, and he squatted there for 3 years with no income. That was Ron Kruger's lifestyle.
That was Ron.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It gets better.
Oh,
yeah,
I can
yeah. Well, he said, he admitted, I became the best poacher in the state. I mean, he had no income. So he lived off of what he could catch, trap, and shoot. But he found somebody's marijuana patch, I guess, and they threatened to burn his shack down and kind of run him out of that part of the country. But we all admired him so, but he called me one time. He had a wife at the time, I guess, was quite a dopehead, and she kept him in the hock all the time. So he just called me one time and said, Bill, he had a beat up old truck pickup. He said, I packed my truck with all my hunting and fishing gear, and I got Doc, my dog, and we're going to the woods, and we're staying in the woods over the winter. I said, you're crazy, dude. You die out there. I said, I got a hole upstairs in my house. Just come stay here until you get back on your feet. But dang, man, we'd get into it once in a while. He'd get in one of these moods. We'd be cutting wood or something. It's like 2 old men ready to come to fisticuffs out in the woods, you know. And then him and my wife got into it. They wouldn't even speak to each other, so I'm trying to keep them apart from killing each other, you know.
But all the while, he's making beautiful photographs.
He is, just non-stop, man. But I loved him. We floated down the Jacks Fork and the Current River one time for like 5 days. I think we only floated 12 miles. So he'd sit in front and I'd paddle, and he'd catch monster smallmouth, and I did all the cooking for him. And he got up one morning. He's already out there in the stream in his underwear, standing there fishing. And I started making breakfast, and all made pancakes, cinnamon apple pancakes with whipped cream on top, you know, scrambled eggs.
These are your camping meals.
This is the Gravel Bar Gourmet. I'm not kidding, folks. I've been with him.
I had some meat with it, And he said, what is that meat? I said, it's black bear from Canada. He said, you're shitting me. We're sitting out here on the river eating cinnamon apple pancakes with whipped cream and black bear from Canada. Now, who does that? And that sucker, though, he get the biggest laugh out of getting something over on you, you know. So right off the bat, he used to guide down here, so he knew where all the good fishing holes were. And right off the bat, he wanted to make a $5 bet. He'd catch the biggest smallmouth. Well, we broke that camp where we had the bear for breakfast, and foggy, beautiful morning, man, in the fall. Turkeys had roosted right across the river from us, man. We saw eagles. We saw ospreys. We heard an elk bugle just echoed through the hills late in the evening. But we pushed off from that camp the next morning, and you know how it is paddling on. Your experience with paddle and canoe, you always got to adjust something, seems like, when you first take off. So I laid my fishing rod down. I just tied a crankbait on it. He picks it up, first cast, catches the biggest friggin' fish of the trip, and he turns around and he says, you owe me $5 because this is going to be the biggest fish. I said, like hell I do. That's my rod. I'll give you 50 cents.
Now, to bring it full circle, Ron has since passed, and what the trip I was talking about on the Current last summer, we paddled, I took the Chief, which is the Conservation Federation of Missouri's legendary old canoe, all covered with bumper stickers.
Yeah. You look like a billboard floating down the river.
Nice. And it was neat to see Bill paddling the Ron Kruger special.
Yeah,
Ron's old boat.
Yeah, that was a little emotional, you know. And then I had the mayor.
The mayor.
I mean, that's
I was hoping you bring that up.
And he cussed and raised Cain because we put him in a canoe. I hate these friggin' canoes. I said, well, what do you float in? He said, we always just hop in an old John boat and we never paddle. We just turn it loose. It's got a mind of its own. Well, I said, we don't float the river to paddle. We float the river to fish. He said, if it runs into a rock, it'll bounce off. It hangs up on a log, it'll eventually wash off, you know. And so here I'm in the canoe with him. We're loaded. We're the commissary boat. We got all the food. And
you got to let me interrupt real quick.
Yeah.
Time out 1 second.
Yeah.
To put stuff in context, because folks are listening to this, we're sitting in Happy Holler, which is a little hollow down here in Shannon County, Missouri, and Darrell is the mayor. That's who.
You got a constituency of 3, I think.
Yeah, a constituency of 3. A constituency of 3. Yeah. He lives down across the holler here, and has the nicest outdoor plumbing that have anybody in the holler.
Yep.
You betcha.
But
there's a heater in there.
Darrell is a great guy, and he's helped build this lodge that we're staying in tonight and been an integral part of all this.
Yeah,
but,
he's just
this little valley back in here is
world-class, interesting character.
He is a great guy, and can tell you every single shortcut and secret to doing good carpentry. He's been up here when we put every nail in this building, but as we speak, he's right down across the holler here.
Yeah.
So that's who the mayor is. He's one of the regulars down here, and he's a great guy.
You betcha. But we shoved off into the current, and I could see right quick he wasn't going to hit a lick that whole trip with a paddle. So not 30 yards down, there's kind of a drop and a turn, big rocks. I mean, you flip a canoe over there real easy.
Yeah.
So I shoved her off. I didn't even pick up my paddle. I just let her drift. I thought, I'm going to find out. Well, he looked up and saw we were going to crash and burn. He grabbed up a paddle, and he's in the front. He straightened that canoe up right through the right spot, around the curves. And I thought, you lying little devil, you paddle canoe.
This is coming from the man who's never paddled in his life, right?
Yeah.
As we speak, that is perfect timing.
Yeah, I was going to say,
the mayor
driving right up and giving us a honk.
And just honked as he went by. That is perfect timing.
But tell him about the camping out that night.
So, camping out. He, now, we all had, the Gravel Bar Gourmet here. He had, the boat he was paddling was set because it was our commissary. He had everything there was to cook everything good. The rest of us were overloaded at best.
Yeah.
And Daryl showed up in cutoffs. Excuse me, the mayor showed up in cutoffs and a T-shirt, and that was all he brought. And we get to that first gravel bar, and Brandon was nice enough to bring him a tent. He throws the tent on the ground and folds it over once, and that's it. He slept on the gravel bar on top of the tent. And that was good enough. That was good enough for Daryl.
Yeah, I sleep in a reclining lawn chair and threw a tarp over myself. The mayor's right over by me, and I looked at him. I said, "Mayor, are you going to sleep on that gravel?" He said, "Hell no, I'm going to sleep on the airspace in between it." And he did. Lay there all night long, face up, man. He's as tough as a pine knot.
So they made me feel like I was the soft one in the bunch, but there was a sycamore treetop down across the gravel bar, and I climbed up in the top of that top and strung a hammock up in there.
He's sleeping in the treetops.
I slept in the
treetop. On the ground, but
treetops on the ground. It's about the neat thing was I was probably 7 foot over the water, where the water come trickling around this double bend and had this most beautiful little trickling sound all night. And I have never slept better in my life. But what made it even sweeter was if I cracked the top of that hammock open and looked up, was that view we were talking about earlier of the Milky Way. It was, I got to say it again, it was like I never thought was possible to view in the lower 48. You could see every vein of it, all the colors of the sky, and it was something else.
It really was, and I've floated thousands of miles on these rivers in 40 years, but that was the most enjoyable trip I ever made, and it was because of the company. We just had so many. Everybody was a character,
Well, something else folks might find interesting is, this area was founded on. We're sitting literally probably 30 yards from what used to be the town center of Timber.
Yep.
And, Timber, Missouri was built on timber and charcoal.
Is that what those foundations are?
That's what that is at the bottom of the hill there. Brandon was saying that was that root cellar was the community root cellar, and that building was the post office, mercantile, everything else.
Well, so just to give some context, walking up from the fancy bathroom, so we got limited water up here. So the restroom is as wide as the great outdoors, unless you got to drop a deuce.
Visit the mayor's.
Then you got to go to the mayor's accommodations, and there is
the nicest outdoor plumbing.
Very fancy. It's got some nice decor inside. It's got a heater that when that thing kicks on and you've dropped trout, that'll warm.
It has.
That'll warm your jewels
it's
right
up.
up.
It's a one-holer with heat and air conditioning.
He needs to make one improvement though. He needs a fur-lined toilet seat. You need to capture one of those raccoons and make him one.
I don't want to share that with you guys.
But so walking back up from the lovely bathroom accommodations, coming up the driveway on the left,
it's an old foundation.
You can see an old foundation, a root cellar, some steps up and stuff. And
well, I was
wondering today what that was.
That's a town of Timber, which back in the day, this was nothing but timber and charcoal, if I'm not mistaken, that was turned out of this area. And when industry changed, this is what I found fascinating. Talk about we're going back to our current river trip and Echo Bluff State Park, which if you get a chance to visit Missouri, go to Echo Bluff. That is an incredible lodge. You walk right down there to the bluff and hang out there in the creek, and it's beautiful, cool, clean, clear water. But when the timber industry collapsed, they just basically turned the horses loose, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, everything. Hogs, horses.
So we got hogs out here everywhere. We ran across them, but there's also wild horses in these hills.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting story. I wish Jack Peters was still alive. If you went back to Highway 19, made a ride up there a couple miles, little country store and canoe livery, and Jack Peters ran that for decades. And Jack Peters was the first park ranger sent down here in 1967 when the Park Service only had 70 acres bought up. And of course, they used the powers of eminent domain to buy all of this up. Well, the local hillbillies didn't take too kindly to that. And it was Jack's job to introduce the Park Service to the locals. I mean, he had death threats made and all kinds of stuff. But Jack was also charged with doing some photography work. He was supposed to go around and photograph all the old log cabins, the barns, the lean-tos, because there was several different architectural styles, and the Park Service had said they were going to maintain those architectural styles in the buildings that they put up. Of course, they didn't. But Jack worked on that project for 5 years and then turned all that material over to the Park Service and never saw it again. And he failed to make copies of it. That was always kind of a heart sore with him. But I'll tell one more story about him, but so interesting in the process of traveling hundreds of miles through these hills and hollows and seeking out particular families that had been mentioned. A banker had mentioned a family that had a really unique log house they had built themselves. So Jack rumbled down the hillside and a rough old road and got to the home place, and the man of the house was out under a big sprawling oak tree pulling the motor out of a vehicle, and he said the guy didn't even look up, didn't even acknowledge he had arrived. So Jack goes on up to the house, up on the porch, knocks on the door, and he said this tall, slender lady came to the door, and she was in a flour sack dress. Used to buy 50-pound bags of flour, and it was made in print material so the people could rip that apart and make clothing out of it. This lady had made a flour sack dress, and he said she was rather well endowed, and it was obvious she didn't have on a bra. And he said he's kind of batting his eyes and introduced himself and told her he was there if she would allow it, photograph their home and their family and everything. He said, boy, she just perked up like she's proud as a peacock. Had 8 children, brought them out and lined them up on front of that porch just like stair steps. And he said, Bill, that lady walked over and leaned up against one of the porch posts there, threw her hip out, stuck her hand on her hip, He said, that's the damn sexiest thing I ever saw in my life.
Oh, man.
He was 80-something years old when he told that. I said, Jack, I'm going to tell your wife, man. But Jack really recorded the history of the horses as well. When he first got here in 1967, those horses were, if I remember right, brownish colored, the brown horses. But a bay horse showed up from somewhere and changed the whole complexion of these herds. Today, they're born black. In their youth stages, they're mottled colored, and then as adults, they're totally white. But beautiful, beautiful creatures, man. A lot of controversy here. The hill folks used to round them up, and they'd sell some of the colts off every year. But when the Park Service came in, they immediately wanted to eliminate all of them because they weren't native to the country, and introduce species left here by the timber folks. Some people like to say that DeSoto and the Spaniards left them here, but that's a good story, but not quite true.
Not right.
But anyway, a real fight came up, and Representative Bill Emerson, when he was still alive, managed to get legislation passed that the horses are going to stay. I mean, I think they do call them some. They've been having problems at Echo Bluff State Park with them getting a little too friendly with people. And
that's it. You can go up there.
So they just adopted some of them out, I think.
That state park is beautiful. And
it is.
If you're coming through, you can stay there. And, that lodge is something like you'd expect to see out west in National Park.
Exactly. It's the grandest state park we've had here. But Echo Bluff, interesting history there, too. It used to be a horse camp back in the 1930s, fancy place for rich girls out of St. Louis, and it was always called Camp Zone. It went through several hands. Jack Peters actually even ran it for a good while, and then a young fella by the name of Jimmy Thibault got a hold of it, and Jimmy was a swag dude. He started holding swag stock events, and I used to deliver UPS, run a route down in here, and it was always interesting. About a week before one of the swag events were going to happen, the highway patrol would be set up coming from the north and the south, checking every car that come along. You know, they even checked my UPS truck a time or two. And, of course, they captured a lot of drugs there. But the feds showed up one day and just confiscated everything, took Jimmy's land and everything. And he never was convicted of possession or anything, but kind of aiding and abetting, I guess, the selling of drugs.
So what's a swag party then?
It's, gosh, help me out.
Don't point at me.
It's a big, wild party, wild music, you know, and
this place was
just a bit of a row, really.
Yeah.
It was his own private resort for his own
big music festival.
His own music
of people
events
from all over the country would come. Hippie type. You know?
Okay.
Yep. And it was interesting, but I'd deliver in there. Of course, Jimmy, he was quite a musician and had the dreadlocks and all that stuff, but a perfect gentleman. He always treated me with great dignity, man. Give me tips. Nobody gave out in the hills gave you a tip. But he's always had me a $10 bill, you know, I'd buy lunch, and always had a cold drink for me and gave me free tickets to the, of course, that wasn't my deal. There were young people at work I'd give them to, you know. No, they were all happy. But I really felt bad for Jimmy and didn't like what happened. A lot of local people didn't either. But Governor Nixon at the time, the story's told either his wife or somebody down the line, maybe her grandma, had worked here at the horse camp at some point. So there was kind of a emotional family attachment to this. Plus, there was millions and millions of dollars available from a mitigation project. One of the mines over here around Viburnum had a huge collapse, lots of environmental problems, and they were fined, an astronomical amount of money. And state government was supposed to use that money to buy like lands. Well, some of the locals around Viburnum thought they meant supposed to be spent right there. But Nixon very quickly bought 4 state parks and got some jewels. You know, this was one of them. He got 4,000 acres on the 11-Point River, which just doesn't come up very often. So good move, but caused a lot of controversy.
Yeah.
Well, you know, you talk about the rivers in this area. I just want to talk to you about that, man, because being from southern Indiana, you know, I love this part of Missouri is like where I'm from times 10. The hills are 10 times bigger. The creeks are 10 times better. The rivers are 10 times better than that. You know, we got the Current and what are some of the other rivers around this area?
Oh, boy, there's just so many of them. I live an hour north of here, but right here you got the Current and the Jacks Fork, 2 of the clearest, cleanest, coldest rivers in the state. Another 30 minutes south, my favorite, the 11-Point. You go east, you've got the Black River. If you go north my way, you've got the Merrimack, the Gasconade, the Hoozall, the Curtaway, Osage. I mean,
well, Missouri's also home to the Buffalo, which is the nation's first scenic river. Yeah, and the Scenic Rivers program, which is, I mean, that's the thing I love about here is that, you know, Paddle Don is I got a reputation for being a paddle guy. You know, I canoe, I kayak, but I'm a smallmouth junkie, and trout are a close second. And this is some incredible water anywhere you go in this state, especially in this area of the state. That was the neat thing about our trip on the Current, was that you could fish all day long and not know whether you're going to catch a brown, a rainbow, or a smallmouth. And to be a smallmouth junkie with a trout affliction, you know, that was perfect. I could fish.
He's all messed up.
Yeah, I could fish a big floating topwater fly with a dropper under it and not know what in the world I was going to catch, but know that I was going to be thrilled when I caught it.
Well, I got to get you on another fish species down here. One of my favorite is chain pickerel. They're cousin to a northern pike.
Yeah.
But they're usually small little critters. But down on 11-Point, my wife and I were camped out down there 4 or 5 years ago during deer season. And, we catching all kinds of rainbows right out in front of the camp. And she catches a 22-inch chain pickerel, which is pretty huge for a chain pickerel.
Yeah, it's good
and
size.
I'd heard old timers say where there's one big one, there's another one. So I seen some big minnows right quick, and I took about a 6 to 7 inch minnow, put it on a big bass rod, and flung it out the same area. 2 minutes. I had a 29.5-inch chain pickerel, which was probably a state record, but I didn't want to get off the water to go, the fish would die and all this stuff. And the state record was 5'1", I want to say, and it was a 28-inch fish. So, if not, I was very close, but got a couple pictures and let the thing go. And but great memories, great fun, boy.
Man, this whole area,
it's like a piece of heaven, And of course, this wild area here is the largest really wild area between the Appalachians and the Rockies. It's just hundreds of square miles. I mean, we're sitting right here enjoying 75,000 acres of the Roger Pryor backcountry, and that's 75,000 acres in one block. And Leo Dry, a gentleman who passed away 4 or 5 years ago from St. Louis, he started in the 1930s buying lands on the headwaters of these streams to protect the watersheds, and he accumulated 160,000 acres in his lifetime. And it's always been open to the public to camp on, hunt on, and he was a big promoter of walking and backpacking. That's what this Roger Pryor Wilderness area is about.
Okay.
But incredible human being. Did some great things for us.
That's the area we've been going back into every day out here. Man, it's some absolutely beautiful backcountry.
But it's just amazing we can enjoy all this because, the timber companies started coming in here in about the 1890s, and the whole Ozarks was pretty much, timber companies and railroads were pretty much clear cut. There used to be 18 inches of topsoil on these ridges. They clear cut it, and then when the railroads and the timber companies moved out, a lot of families stayed and tried to live here. It was subsistence farming, but they had the habit of burning every year, supposed to get rid of the ticks and the snakes, but it just allowed the soil to wash off. That's why there's so much gravel in these rivers anymore. Old timers, they're about all gone now, but they used to say that these rivers were deeper and wider, and they even talked about springs being choked with gravel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the gravel wasn't always in these streams like it is today. And fortunately, in the 1930s, the U.S. Forest Service started buying up thousands, millions. We got, I think, close to 3 million acres of national forest in Missouri, most of it in southern Missouri, very little north of Missouri River.
Just to put it all in context for folks that haven't been here, I mean, where we're at is thousands upon thousands of acres of basically it's oak forest with a little bit of red pine, a little bit of other species mixed in, but it's hardwood forest. It's managed, but it's well managed, and you'd never know that it looked like it did back in the day.
Now, back in those days, this became the most economically depressed area in the United States, and that's one reason they started reforesting and taking care of everything the way we are. But Shannon County here, poorest county in the state of Missouri, but it's 87% public land. Between
87%
Department of Conservation, National Park Service, Forest Service, and they've got it.
Now, see where I'm from, down southern Indiana, it was a similar situation. It was like a little Appalachia in that area. And a fellow named Frank Hohenberger came in, and it was his charge in life was to photograph all that, just document everything. And it was a lot like American Gothic, the photograph of the guy with the pitchfork and his wife there in front of the farmhouse. Except in the background, I mean, there is not a tree to be seen anywhere. It's a lot like these hills and hollers and streams, but it's about a third the size. Yeah. But back in the day, it was just all absolutely clear cut. And, now it's home to the state of Indiana's largest state park. And you'd never know. People, we call them the leaf lookers, the flatlanders. They come in from all around to look at the fall foliage.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, it's being out in places like this that just that reminds me of why it is I'm here. Hanging out with fellows like this and just seeing these beautiful sights and these beautiful scenes. Sunrise coming up, on my blind. I tell you what, I tried to snap a couple pictures, but it didn't even do it justice. And then tonight, waiting on y'all to pick me up, we got an SUV, a UTV that we're using. I got done a little bit early and had a buck come in on me that winded me, and he started blowing and blowing, and I knew I was done for the evening. So I hiked out to our pickup point and then walked a little bit further. But sitting up there where our meetup point was, watching that sun come down on this Ozark hillside was absolutely awe-inspiring tonight.
It was just incredible tonight.
There's so many gorgeous spots here. I always make a trip down here in the fall to get the fall foliage. You get on some of these high hills you can see for 30 miles, and sometimes we have good colors. It's just ablaze with the reds and yellows and oranges and purples, and it's just breathtaking scenery. But it's so grasping too, because in my lifetime I've seen so much happen. We've got bears here now.
I was thinking about that tonight while I was waiting on a pickup.
We've got,
there's that saying about, what is it? Any man that's eating a sliced apple off the back of his pocket knife, you should take advice from him. Well, I was sitting there tonight,
that does that.
slicing an apple, eating slices right off the back of my knife blade, and I thought, this smells a lot like an apple, and that was a real nice-sized bear in that trail cam picture a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. And we have the occasional mountain lion sighting. One of the greatest things that's happened in the last decade is reintroduction of elk, and Peck Ranch is just right south of here, and we're going to have a limited elk season next year.
Nice.
Sweet.
I know Tennessee just started theirs a couple years ago, I think.
Yeah.
This year, a couple of years. It's been recent.
And we'll probably have a limited black bear season within the next 5-10 years as well. That's coming also. But just some grand things happening. And I've been trying to convince them, though, that anybody 70 or over should get numerous preference points for the elk hunts. I made a lot of progress with that project, but I think it's a grand idea.
Well, if I could have been putting in, I would have been putting in.
Yeah. But it's really neat to come to the Ozarks in September and October and listen to the elk bugle. That sound has not been here for about 200 years.
That's just crazy to think. It's crazy to think that, I talk about conservation a lot on the podcast and hunters' roles in it. And but, it's amazing. Not only are we protecting, as I say we, royal we, not only are we protecting the elk where they're at now, they're being reintroduced into places like, I think, was it Kentucky also?
Yeah.
Or Kentucky has elk, Tennessee?
Yep. They've had them quite a while.
A lot of these places, like you said, I haven't seen them in a long time. And, I was just talking with someone today, and, I was, posting pictures and stuff from the hunt, and I posted up a picture of Shag's buck, and somebody's like, "Oh, that's so sad," and it's just those conversations every single day, and
sad. That is, we all in outdoor communications field deal with that, but in the 1930s, over 70% of our population still lived in rural areas. Today, we got 3% of the people, or 97% of the people living on 3% of the land, and we're like 3 going into 4 generations removed from the soil, and it's difficult for people who live, not really been associated with the rural style of life. And see, I grew up rather poor, but we had a milk cow, pigs, chickens, and then we hunted and fished a lot. That was important. That was a necessity for us. And that's a lot of the difference today is just the lifestyle. They just have not experienced it.
Everything's handed to us. So everything's processed and handed to us.
I was thinking about that when you guys were talking about that float trip. Because, you were kind of joking. You're like, oh, apparently I'm the soft one on this trip. And I look and I have a lot of, once again, everyone that's listening, and I've told you guys a little bit about my history, and I got most of my friends don't do anything like this. They think I'm way out in left field. They think I'm insane. I go out to Montana and I'll camp by my truck and all this stuff, and really it's not that crazy. I got a bunch of gear. I got a lightweight tent. I got a tent stove, all this stuff, and but I laugh because you talk about like you've got experience beyond what I've got, and it continues, and you kind of look at them and you're like, well, gosh, I guess I'm the soft one. I look at you guys, I'm like, I'm the soft one out here, and then it's funny, you start thinking about those experiences you have and kind of what you do, and I just sometimes I have those moments where I'm like, there are people out there that they will be born, live their entire lives, and die, and never experience even a fraction of these amazing things we get to do and see.
What's just important to realize is that there's that same fraction of people that were born and will grow up, and they will not know anything but needing this kind of lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And this is what they depend on to get through the winter. I'll tell you, I grew up we didn't have to have this. My dad hunted and he fished, and he taught me all these skills, and he instilled these values in me. That's why I feel like I come from the middle on that, because I didn't have to, but we did. Mm-hmm. But there's just as many people that have to, and a lot of folks that other 97%, they don't realize that there's a lot of folks that if they can't do what we're doing out here this weekend, they can't live for the winter. And then that's something else that Shags and we've talked about Shags and Brandon tonight. Shags is Nate Shags McLeod. He does the morning show on KCMQ, the Morning Shag, and he's a very outspoken conservationist. And Brandon Butler is our buddy, who's the former fellow with CFM, and these are the guys that are putting us up out here. And Shags, he was it Share the Harvest? Is that what you call it out here? Mm-hmm. He's a participant in Share the Harvest, and those folks that kill deer that can't necessarily eat a whole one, they can share any portion of it or the whole harvest with those less fortunate. So we talk about the folks that don't understand this and have never been there. There's for every one of those folks, there's one that has to have this. I mean, has to get by. So I think that's important to keep in focus, because even if it's not your thing, it's somebody else's thing, and they depend on it.
Yeah. And what so many people don't get, and I think it's unfortunate too, wildlife conservation in this country was established and is still maintained by hunters and fishermen and outdoorsmen. And in the state of Missouri, we're extremely fortunate because in 1984 we passed a 1/8 of 1% sales tax that everybody contributes to, generates about $190 million a year for our conservation department. We're one of the best in the United States. I don't understand why other states don't do the same thing.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick, Bill.
Pardon?
The model that is the state of Missouri and their system should be used nationwide. I'm just saying that right now.
It needs to be, but it's not. Only one other state has adopted it. That's Arkansas.
It is incredible.
So many other states are in bad, dire straits now because they depend on revenue from sale of hunting and fishing license. Well, only 4% of our national population hunts anymore. We've lost a third of our hunters in the last 30 years, so their revenues are dropping tremendously. There's lots of research going on now to try to find other funding processes. But hunters and fishermen have paid the way for all this ever since it started, but everybody else gets to enjoy it if you're a bird watcher or a hiker or whatever. So I suspect down the road others are going to have to start paying as well.
At the risk of getting into a whole new podcast, R3. That's all I got to say.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The R3 movement.
Yep. But another interesting thing that's happened, I just read a tremendous article. Gosh, I wish I had it in front of me. A few weeks ago. And Wade talked about Paddle Don just put all
Paddle Don just went backwards over his chair.
He's sitting on a little folding stool here, and
it folded.
It
Pardon the noise
folded
when I get back up.
Well, at least you fell down the hill instead of in a campfire.
Yeah,
I've seen that happen a couple of times, and that's
hell.
never good. You really made me lose my train of thought there, Don.
Oh well.
Well, guys, I will say.
We've been talking a lot.
I was going to say I would sit and continue this conversation, like I said, for another 2 hours. But I'm gonna ask you. You may have to think about this one for a minute. But we've been talking a lot about the local stories and things like that, and now it doesn't have to be necessarily specific to Missouri. It can be if you want. But what's one of your favorite books or favorite collections of stories like that if somebody's like, I just love these kind of old stories, something like that, these old hunting stories, these old outdoor stories, what's maybe like one of your favorites, maybe something somebody could look up, or even if they probably can't even find it, what's
Charlie Farmer, who's gone now, died way too young of cancer. He wrote a book, I believe it's called The Wilderness of Missouri or something to that effect, but a lot of old stories about everything, hunting, camping, and a lot of these were spun off of trips that he made. But it's a good introduction to the Ozarks and kind of the feel that middle-aged old-timers really have and how we did things, But Charlie was a talented writer, and he and Ron Kruger
Ron
did one of the most incredible stories I ever saw in my life about hunting in the Ozarks, and I'll never forget this one picture. It was a horseback ride-in turkey hunting trip. They had the big wall tent set up, and they had a photograph in front of one of those wall tents, a big old red horse with a big wild turkey gobbler hanging off the saddle horn. One of the most impressive outdoor photographs I ever saw in my life. But that came from Charlie Farmer and Ron Kruger, two of the best.
I'm sure. For me, these are some of the quintessential favorites, but first fell in love with Grits Gresham and anything he did. Just a great outdoor writer. And then, I answer the moniker Paddle Don, but I'm also Hoosier Fly Daddy. And
once again, to clarify, that's not who is your fly daddy.
That's Hoosier.
That's Hoosier, as in
a
one
proudful,
from Indiana.
A proudful member of the Hoosier State from Indiana.
But what else could that mean, by the way?
Well, in certain parts of the country, that's a pretty good insult.
I can tell you, man. I give it to them, It's like a bad slur,
Some parts of the country you can say you're a Hoosier with pride.
To be a Hoosier.
You come to Missouri and be called a Hoosier for other reasons.
So your moniker is Hoosier
Fly Daddy is my. That's what I go by on Instagram. That's always been my other call sign. I've got a passion for fly fishing. I got a passion for smallmouth, and 60% of that is fly fishing, and 40% of the time you can't do that, so you spin fish. But it's all about that, and John Garrick, anything he writes is, that's to me, that's how I think and feel, and that's what it is I'm going for every time I go out there.
All right. Well, one thing I always like to end with is, this. A lot of my audience, they're new hunters. They're not from traditional backgrounds. They didn't necessarily grow up with granddad's gun, walking through the woods. So say, I don't know, you run into someone at the sports store, at the fly shop, whatever it is, and you're swapping stories, and they're talking to you, and they're like, oh man, I love all this hunting and this fly fishing stuff. I'm really interested in it, but shoot, I grew up in the city. Like, I don't have any family friends that do it. I don't know if I can't. Like, I'm a little intimidated by this. I don't know if I can do this. What would you tell someone that feels a little intimidated about getting into the outdoors?
Hook up with somebody that's got experience at fly shops, those types of stores. Great places to hang out because you're going to meet some interesting characters who are willing to teach you, to help you.
The old timers may seem quiet, but they are dying to share.
Yeah, absolutely.
And man, they got a lot to share.
They really do. And the intimidation factor, we've all felt it at times. You know, I remember first starting as an outdoor rider, and boy, you finally got to rub elbows with somebody that was famous. And oh my gosh, you was almost afraid to open your mouth.
That was Bill for me.
Well, now you call him Papa.
Yeah. But just jump right in there, man. Ask the questions. Like a guy in the fly shop, a dear friend of mine in St. James. He's Vietnam vet and bad to health, but I watch young fellows and gals come in there all the time. Of course, he immediately asks if he can help them.
Watch him come
They
to
don't
life.
know what they're looking for. See, they don't want to appear stupid, you know. And it's, I don't want to ask a stupid question. He always tells them, only stupid question is the one you don't ask.
Yep.
You know, it's funny you bring this around to that tonight. We were sitting in here waiting on dinner to be done. We got limited Wi-Fi here where we're at best. And a message came through from a distant cousin of mine who said he's looking to pick up fly fishing. Now, he and I have been following each other on social media and, watching our fish pictures be posted left and right for the last couple of years. And this guy's got a passion for it, and he's got a talent for it. And I watched him catch a whole lot of real nice smallmouth spin fishing. But he contacted me tonight asking me, what do I need to do to get into this? And I told him, I said, man, I'm in the Ozarks with limited reception and just got this message. But rest assured, as soon as I get back to civilization, we'll be in touch. I'll be happy to put you in touch with whoever you need, whatever you need. I just want to get somebody else started on this because, man, it's incredible.
But as we're winding this thing up, an incredible thought. I was sharing a campfire just 3 weeks ago with some guys at a muzzleloader hunt, and a very wise retired lieutenant colonel from the Army, loves the outdoors, very passionate about it, and he was hunting with a much younger fellow he met 20 years ago, and the only time they get together is for muzzleloader draw camps, But he made the statement. He said, here we are, three of us from all different backgrounds, and just like we melded together into one, because when outdoorsmen come together, I don't care what race, what socioeconomic group or backgrounds, we all got something in common.
Perfect.
Come on, look at me. Do you like how different can that be?
Yeah, but
we all got
we look at this campfire and see what we've got in common.
Yep. And I would have no problem sitting down and continuing this conversation for another 2 hours.
Yeah, we could go forever.
I think we could go easily till the sun came up. But on that note, all right, if folks wanted to hunt you guys down online or something, send you a question or follow along with the fun, where can they find you?
Well, me, I'm Instagram. I'm Hoosier Fly Daddy.
Again, Hoosier.
Just
because I made that.
As a native of Indiana. Hoosier Fly Daddy. Don Cranfill on Facebook. And I actually have, if you go there now, it will say it's parked for free. However, as of the middle of November, this is correct information, but somewhere around the end of the month to beginning of December, we'll be going live with a new website called smallwaterjournal.fish. I've got a passion for the small water. The bass guys, they have their media, and the fly guys have their media, and I'm trying to put something out there for the everyday guy in between. 10 horse and under, no motor lakes, reclaimed water, small rivers, just people who are in it for more of the experience than the adrenaline rush of it. People who are in it for the mental side of it. But still want to catch fish and know the latest tactics, techniques, and destinations.
On Facebook, you can look me up at the Fly Rod Journals or Outside Again Adventures. And a lot of people quiz me about that outside again. You don't hear that too much. I was born practically in the outdoors, and we didn't have a very big home and several kids and running in and out. My mom used to tell us, "You kids get outside." We'd all yell, "Again?"
I love it.
I'll also add one last little addendum there. Wild Indiana. A few of us started an outdoor magazine several years ago that's a local magazine called Wild Indiana, and it's been an incredible journey. And we've grown that and had a blast with it. But we have a Facebook page at Wild Indiana Magazine, and same with Facebook as well, with Instagram as well. We try and bring you a little bit more than just fishing, everything there is to do in the Hoosier outdoors. But I'll leave it at that before Bill makes another Hoosier joke.
All right, gentlemen. Well, I appreciate you sitting down, sharing the campfire. I'm not sure I'm ready to get up yet, but I've had a couple of beers, and I'm about ready to go hit the.
Yeah, I'm ready
nice
for deer session Monday a.m.
Yep. Whew.
Back in the deer woods.
All right, I'm ending this thing.
All right, y'all, that'll do it for episode 126 of the Wild Initiative. Big thank you to Paddle Dawn and Coop for sitting down with me. Really enjoyed getting to share the campfire and hear a lot of their stories. Make sure y'all head on over to the show notes page at thewildinitiative.com/126. Get info and links to everything we talked about in today's episode. That'll do it for today, y'all. I'm looking forward to next week, but in the meantime, I hope this episode inspired you to get involved, get outdoors, and plan your initiative for the wild.
Thank you for listening to The Wild Initiative. Please take a moment to leave a rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher, and head on over to thewildinitiative.com to get show notes, check out the blog, gear discounts, other podcasts from the Wild Initiative family, and more.